Have you ever wondered what the cost of perfection really is? Most people think it's hard work or discipline, but in my house, the price of looking perfect was my soul. My name is Ilara Hayes, and I grew up in a home where the shutters were always painted a cheerful blue. The lawn was never a centimeter too long, and the truth was treated like a stray dog that needed to be put down. Imagine living in a world where your mother would rather you be broken in silence than difficult in public. Imagine a father who preaches about the sanctity of the family while he hand-delivers you to a monster, because that monster has a respectable resume. The day my family chose my abuser over me, they didn't just break my heart, they tried to delete my existence. They wanted the girl who smiled in the Christmas cards, not the girl who screamed in the night. I want to stop right here and ask you, have you ever felt like your pain was an inconvenience to the people who were supposed to love you? Have you ever had to choose between your truth and your family's comfort? Drop a truth in the comments if you've ever had to find your own voice when everyone else was trying to drown it out. This isn't just about a betrayal, it's about the terrifying moment you realize your parents aren't your protectors, they're the audience for your destruction. This is the price of perfection.
Maple Crescent was the kind of street where nothing ever happened because we were all too busy making sure it stayed that way. We lived at number 42, the house with the blue shutters that my mother, Lorraine, claimed were the soul of the neighborhood. To the outside world, we were the gold standard of American stability. My mother was the president of the garden club, my father, Martin, was a senior partner at his firm, and my sister, Marissa, was the captain of the debate team. Image isn't vanity, Ilara, my mother would say as she ran a white-gloved finger along the top of the doorframe, checking for a microscopic speck of dust. Image is power. It's how we tell the world that we are in control. If you lose control of the image, you lose everything. I was the quiet one, the 15-year-old ghost who hovered at the edges of their brilliance. In our house, there was an unspoken rule. If you can't say something that sounds like a Hallmark card, don't say anything at all. Discomfort was a social faux pas. Crying was considered dramatic. Fear was attention-seeking. We were a family that communicated in pleasantries and polished surfaces, hiding the rot beneath the floorboards with expensive Persian rugs. My father was the enforcer of the Hayes loyalty. He didn't raise his voice, and he didn't have to. He had a way of tapping his heavy gold wedding ring against any hard surface when he was displeased. Clack, clack, clack. A sound that echoed like a hammer on a coffin. "We are a unit," he'd say during our mandatory Sunday dinners. "We protect the name. We protect the house. Anything that threatens the unit is an enemy." I spent my childhood trying to be invisible, thinking that if I didn't make a sound, I wouldn't be the one to break the glass. I watched my sister Marissa navigate the world with a confidence I could never touch, oblivious to the fact that her perfection was the cage we were all trapped in. We were the respectable Hayes family, a masterpiece of suburban theater. But as I sat at that dinner table, watching the steam rise from a roast that tasted like ash, I realized the terrifying truth. In this house, the only thing more important than the truth was the lie that replaced it. And the lie was about to walk through our front door wearing a tuxedo. To understand the betrayal, you have to understand who Ethan Cole was to us. He wasn't just some guy my sister was dating, he was the son my father had always wanted, and the gentleman my mother had prayed for. He was Marissa's fiancé-in-waiting, a man so deeply woven into our family fabric that we had already picked out his place at the Thanksgiving table for the next 50 years. He was 21, a star student at the local university, and a deacon in training at our church. To the Hayes family, Ethan wasn't an outsider, he was an upgrade. "He's a rare breed," my father would say, watching from the porch as Ethan helped him strip the engine of the old Ford. "He's got traditional values, Lorraine. He understands that a man is defined by his character and his contributions. He's the kind of man who makes a family stronger." And Ethan understood character perfectly, specifically how to perform one that mirrored my parents' obsession with respectability. He moved through our house with a proprietary grace, as if he had already memorized the blueprint of our lives. He knew exactly how my mother liked her tea, which historical biographies my father kept on the nightstand, and exactly how to make my sister, Marissa, feel like the center of the universe. He was the golden boy of Maple Crescent. But for me, the golden light around Ethan had a jagged edge. It started with accidents that only I seemed to notice, a hand that lingered a few seconds too long on the small of my back as he passed me in the narrow hallway, a playful hair tussle that felt more like a grip. He had a way of standing just a little too close, invading my personal space in a way that felt like a silent, mocking dare. He was testing the perimeter of our family's perfection, seeing just how much he could get away with before the decency of the house would be forced to acknowledge him. "You're growing up so fast, Alara," he whispered one afternoon while we were alone in the kitchen. My parents were just 10 feet away in the garden, laughing. His voice was low, stripped of the cheerful, bright cadence he used with my father. It felt heavy, like a threat wrapped in a silk ribbon. "You're starting to look just like your sister, maybe even better. You have those eyes, the kind that look like they're good at keeping secrets." I felt a cold, sharp shiver trace its way down my spine, a primal instinct screaming that a predator was in the room. I pulled away, my heart hammering against my ribs, but when I looked back, he was already walking toward the living room, shouting a joke to my father about the evening news. "What's wrong with you?" Marissa asked later that night, noticing my silence at dinner. "You've been acting like a ghost lately. Ethan tried to talk to you today and you just ran off. Don't be weird, Alara. He's going to be your brother-in-law soon. Don't ruin this for us." I looked at her, my vibrant, happy sister, and then at my parents, who were nodding in agreement. They didn't see a threat, they saw a future. They saw a respectable addition to the family tree. I was the only one who saw the wolf in the vestry. I was the only one who felt the trap closing. I want to stop right here and ask you, have you ever had a family favorite who made your skin crawl? Someone everyone else worshipped but you saw the darkness in? If you've ever been told you were being weird for trusting your gut, drop a "believe me" in the comments. Let's show each other we weren't crazy. In the Hayes house, your eyes were only allowed to see what was appropriate, and Ethan Cole was the most appropriate thing that ever happened to us. I stayed quiet, swallowing my fear like a stone, while the man everyone loved moved closer and closer to the heart of our home. I didn't realize that by staying silent, I was helping him build the walls of my own prison.
The evening of October 14th began like any other Friday in the Hayes household, with the orchestrated precision of a stage play. My parents were dressed in their finest community leader attire for a charity gala at the country club. Marissa, radiant and oblivious, was headed to a pre-game bonfire with her friends. "Ethan said he'd stop by to drop off those files for your father's committee," my mother said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. "Be a dear and let him in, Ilara. Don't just hide in your room like a hermit. Show some hospitality."
I remember the click of her heels on the hardwood, a sharp, rhythmic sound that faded as they walked out the door. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. I went to the kitchen to do my homework, the hum of the refrigerator the only company I wanted. But at 7:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened it, the night air was damp and smelling of incoming rain. Ethan didn't wait to be invited. He stepped over the threshold with a proprietary confidence, shaking a few droplets from his windbreaker. He didn't have any files. He didn't have anything in his hands at all except the keys to his car, which he tossed onto the entry table with a definitive clack. "House is quiet tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. "My parents are out," I said, my voice sounding thin and metallic to my own ears. "You can leave the files on the desk. I'll tell my dad you stopped by." He didn't move toward the desk. He moved toward the kitchen, toward me. "No rush, Ilara. I thought we could catch up. You're always so elusive. It's almost like you're afraid of me." He smiled, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. They were flat, calculating, and entirely devoid of the golden boy charm he used on my father. He sat at the kitchen table, occupying my space, his presence turning the room I felt safe in into a cage. "I have a lot of homework," I whispered, reaching for my books. His hand shot out, pinning my notebook to the table. "Homework can wait. You know your parents think the world of me. Your sister thinks I'm a saint, but you're the only one who sees me, aren't you?" The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to breathe. He stood up, walking around the table until he was standing directly behind me. I could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy, and the faint scent of rain. He leaned down, his breath hot against my ear. "The thing about a perfect house, Ilara, is that nobody wants to hear a scream. It ruins the acoustics." What happened in the hours that followed didn't just break my body, it broke the very concept of home. I had spent 16 years believing that these walls were a shield, that my father's loyalty and my mother's reputability were a fortress. But as the rain began to lash against the windows of Maple Crescent, I realized the terrifying truth. A fortress only works if the guards aren't the ones who let the monster in. When Ethan finally left, he didn't run. He straightened his collar, checked his reflection in the same mirror my mother had used 2 hours earlier, and winked at me in the glass. "See you at Sunday dinner, Ilara. Don't forget to smile for the guests." I sat on the floor of the darkened hallway, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway. The house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was no longer a sign of virtue. It was the sound of a crime being absorbed by the drywall. I looked at the blue shutters, snapped shut against the night, and realized they weren't there to keep the danger out. They were there to make sure no one on the outside could see what was happening within. The 3 weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological haunting. Every time the front door opened, my heart performed a violent, stuttering dance against my ribs. Every time I heard the deep, cheerful rumble of Ethan's voice in the living room, laughing with my father about the stock market or complimenting my mother's pot roast, I felt a physical wave of nausea that I had to swallow down like bile. He was everywhere. He was the golden boy who sat at our table, bowed his head for grace, and then looked at me across the steam of the vegetables with eyes that said, "I own this house, and I own you." I spent those 21 days in a state of frantic rehearsal. I would lock myself in the bathroom, turn the shower on high to drown out the sound, and stare at my reflection until my eyes blurred. "Mom, Ethan hurt me," I'd whisper to the fogged-up glass. "Mom, Ethan isn't who you think he is. Mom, please help me." Each time I said the words, they felt heavier, like stones I was trying to keep from sinking. I looked for a crack in my mother's armor, a moment where she wasn't Lorraine Hayes, president of the garden club, but just my mother. I waited for her to notice that I had stopped eating. I waited for her to ask why I flinched when the phone rang. I waited for her to see the shadow that had taken up permanent residence in my eyes. But Lorraine only saw what she had trained herself to see, a respectable home. The opportunity finally came on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was quiet. My father was at the office, and Marissa was at volleyball practice. My mother was in the laundry room, her movements rhythmic and precise as she folded a stack of white towels. The scent of lavender bleach was overpowering, the smell of a house that was constantly being scrubbed of its reality. I stood in the doorway, my hands trembling so violently I had to hide them behind my back. My throat felt like it was lined with broken glass. "Mom?" I said. My voice was a ghost of itself. She didn't stop folding. She didn't even look up. "Yes, Ilara, if you're going to ask for a ride to the mall, the answer is no. I have the committee meeting at 4. "It's not about the mall," I said, stepping into the room. The heat from the dryer felt suffocating. "Mom, something happened with Ethan on the night you were at the gala." The towel in her hands stopped mid-air. Slowly, deliberately, she finished the fold. She smoothed the fabric with her palm, her movements calm, but I saw the slight tightening of her jaw. "What do you mean, something happened?" Her tone wasn't concerned. It was flat. It was the tone she used when the dry cleaner lost a shirt. I told her. I didn't use flowery language. I didn't cry. I laid out the truth in the stark, cold light of the laundry room. I told her about the hallway, about the kitchen, about the way he had whispered that no one wanted to hear a scream in a perfect house. When I finished, the only sound was the low hum of the dryer. My mother didn't pull me into her arms. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for the phone. She just stood there, staring at the stack of white towels as if they held the answer to a riddle. Then she sighed. It was a long, weary sound, the sound of someone who had just been given an extra chore she didn't have time for. "Ilara," she said, finally turning to face me. Her eyes weren't filled with motherly love. They were filled with a cold, simmering irritation. "You have always had such a vivid imagination. You've always been sensitive, jealous even of the attention Marissa gets." "Mom, I'm not imagining this," I whispered, the first tear finally breaking free. "Ethan hurt me. I'm scared." "Ethan is a deacon," she snapped, her voice sharpening like a razor. "He is a good man from a good family. Do you have any idea what an accusation like that would do to this house, to your sister's future, to your father's position?" She stepped towards me, her face inches from mine. I could see the tiny lines of stress around her mouth, the price she paid for her perfection. "You must have misunderstood a gesture, Ilara. You've misinterpreted his kindness. I don't want to hear another word about this, not one. We are a respectable family, and we do not participate in slander." She turned back to her laundry, the conversation over before it had even begun. I stood there, rooted to the spot, realizing that the lavender and bleach didn't just clean the clothes. It was meant to wash away the daughter who had finally dared to break the script. I wasn't a victim to her. I was a stain, and in the Hayes house, stains were handled with cold, clinical efficiency.
The following evening, the family meeting was convened. In the Hayes house, a meeting wasn't a discussion, it was a tribunal. My father sat at the head of the table, his hands folded over a leather-bound planner, as if he were presiding over a corporate merger. To his right, Marissa sat with Ethan. They were holding hands, a public display of solidarity that felt like a physical blow to my chest. My mother had clearly prepared them. The air in the room was thick with a synthetic calm, the kind of silence that precedes a controlled demolition. "Ilara," my father began, his voice resonant and terrifyingly steady. He didn't look at me with concern. He looked at me with the weary disappointment of a man dealing with a faulty appliance. "Your mother has informed us of the claims you've been making. These are very serious allegations, allegations that could destroy a man's life, a man we consider family." I looked at Ethan. He wasn't cowering, he wasn't sweating. He was wearing a soft navy blue sweater and a look of profound, wounded sorrow. He looked like a martyr. "I don't know where this is coming from, Ilara," his voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. "I've always looked at you like a little sister. I've tried to be there for you, to be a mentor. If I hugged you too long or said something you took the wrong way, I am deeply, deeply sorry. My heart is broken that you could think such things of me." "He's been crying all day, Ilara," Marissa snapped, her voice trembling with a protective rage. She gripped Ethan's hand tighter. "How could you do this? Do you have any idea what this would do to his career, to our wedding? You've always been jealous of me, but this is sick." "I'm not jealous," I screamed, the sound echoing off the crown molding. "He came here when you were out. He told me no one would hear me scream. He—" Clack, clack, clack. My father's wedding ring hit the table. The sound was like a gunshot. I went instantly silent. "We do not raise our voices in this house. We deal in facts, not histrionics. Ethan has given us his word. He is a man of God. You, on the other hand, have always had a vivid imagination. You seek attention in the most destructive ways." "Martin, please," my mother whispered, though she didn't move to help me. "She's just confused. She's misinterpreted a gesture." "No, Lorraine," my father said, standing up. He loomed over the table, a silhouette of patriarchal authority. "She is choosing to jeopardize the unit. She is choosing to bring shame upon this house for the sake of a fantasy. We protect our own, Ilara, but we do not protect liars." He looked at Ethan and nodded, a silent acquittal. "This conversation is over," my father declared. "You will apologize to Ethan for these slanders, and you will never mention this again. If you do, you will find that the protection of this family has its limits." I looked around the table. My mother was staring at her water glass. Marissa was whispering something comforting to the man who had broken me. And Ethan looked at me over Marissa's shoulder. Just for a second, the sorrow vanished. He smiled, a tiny, razor-thin tilt of the lips. It was the smile of a man who knew the system was rigged in his favor. I realized then that I wasn't being heard because they weren't listening for the truth. They were listening for the version of the story that allowed them to keep their blue shutters and their Sunday dinners. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was a defect in the manufacturing, and in the Hayes house, defects were simply discarded. The weeks following the trial were a slow, agonizing erasure. My father had issued his decree: silence or exile. I chose a third option, one I didn't even know I was capable of. I became a ghost in my own home. I stopped speaking at dinner. I stopped laughing at Marissa's jokes. I stopped existing in the periphery of their perfect lives. I moved through the hallways of the house on Maple Crescent like a shadow, making sure my feet never made a sound on the polished hardwood, terrified that if I made too much noise, I would provoke the family jury into another session of judgment. But the most horrific part of being a ghost wasn't the silence, it was the normalcy. Every Sunday, the ritual continued. My mother would roast a chicken, the scent of rosemary and lemon filling the house with a deceptive warmth. My father would pour the wine, and Ethan, the man who had stolen my safety, would sit in his usual chair. He would lead the prayer, his voice steady and pious, thanking God for the blessings of a loyal family. "Pass the salt, would you, Ilara?" he asked one evening, his voice casual, as if we were just two people sharing a meal instead of a victim and her predator. I froze. My hand trembled near the shaker. I looked at my mother, pleading with my eyes for her to say something, anything, to acknowledge the obscenity of this moment. She was carefully cutting a piece of carrots, her focus entirely on the symmetry of her plate. She didn't look up. My father was sipping his wine, his gaze fixed on the evening news playing silently on the small kitchen TV. "Ilara," my father said, his voice a low warning, "Ethan asked you for the salt. Don't be rude." I pushed the shaker toward him. It slid across the lace tablecloth with a gritty sound that felt like it was scraping against my soul. Ethan smiled, that same razor-thin tilt of the lips, and nodded. "Thank you, Ilara. It's so good to see you participating again. We've missed your spirit." I realized then that this was my punishment. They weren't just ignoring the truth, they were forcing me to perform the lie alongside them. They wanted me to be the good daughter who had misunderstood a tragedy. They wanted me to be a supporting actress in the play of their respectability. Every meal was a test of my compliance. Every time I didn't scream, I was giving them exactly what they wanted: peace. But peace in the Hayes house was built on a foundation of bones. I began to spend all my time in my room, the only place where the blue shutter illusion felt like it might crack. I stopped looking in the mirror because I didn't recognize the girl staring back. She looked hollow. She looked haunted. She looked like someone who was slowly digested by a family that valued its reputation more than her life. Marissa would occasionally knock on my door, her voice filled with a performative pity that was worse than her anger. "You should come out, Ilara. Ethan brought over those pastries you like. Don't be so dramatic. Life goes on, you know." Life goes on for the people who don't have to carry the weight. Life goes on for the people who chose the comfort of a deacon's smile over the brokenness of a daughter's heart. I sat in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across my ceiling like searchlights. I realized that as long as I stayed in this house, I was a ghost, and ghosts don't have voices. If I wanted to be heard, if I wanted to survive, I had to find a way to leave the graveyard. In the Hayes house, birthdays were usually grand, performative affairs.
There were professional cakes, guest lists of respectable family friends, and photos taken for the annual Christmas card. But for my 18th birthday, I didn't want a party. I didn't want the golden boy handing me a gift with a wink while my parents beamed. I didn't want another year of being a ghost in a house of mirrors. I wanted out. For 6 months, I had been a shadow. I worked a part-time job at the local library, a place where silence was a rule, not a weapon. I saved every cent, hiding the cash inside the lining of an old winter coat that my mother never bothered to wash. I watched the clock. I watched the calendar. I watched the way Ethan moved through our house with increasing arrogance, his hand now permanently stationed on Marissa's waist, his laughter louder, his authority in the family unquestioned. "You're being very mature lately, Alara," my mother said on the morning of my birthday, sliding a small wrapped gold box across the breakfast table. Inside was a delicate gold cross, a symbol of the faith they used to mask their complicity. "It's good to see you've moved past that difficult phase. We're so proud of the woman you're becoming." "The woman you broke," I thought, but I didn't say it. I just nodded and put the necklace on. I was playing the part one last time. I was the good daughter until the sun went down. At 2 a.m., while the house on Maple Crescent slept the deep, undisturbed sleep of the willfully blind, I got up. I didn't turn on the lights. I needed none. I knew the geography of my prison by heart. I packed my life into a single battered suitcase, the clothes that didn't smell like lavender bleach, the few books that offered me comfort, and the cash I had bled for at the library. I walked down the hallway, past Marissa's room, where the man who destroyed me was likely dreaming of his bright, respectable future. I passed my parents' room, where the silence was so thick it felt like a physical barrier. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? "I'm leaving because you traded me for a reputation?" They already knew that. They just didn't care. I stood on the porch for a final moment, looking at the blue shutters. In the pale moonlight, they didn't look cheerful. They looked like bruises. I walked to the end of the driveway and didn't look back. The walk to the bus station was 2 miles, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth. When the bus finally pulled in, a loud, screeching beast of metal, I felt a sudden, terrifying rush of air in my lungs. For the first time in 3 years, I could breathe. The bus driver didn't ask me my name. He didn't ask if I was respectable. He just took my ticket and nodded toward the back. As the bus pulled away from the curb and leaving the cul-de-sac behind, I watched the Hayes house shrink into the distance. It looked small. It looked fragile. It looked like a dollhouse where the people inside were too afraid to move in case they broke the furniture. I was 18 years and 3 hours old, and I was homeless, penniless, and alone. But as the city lights began to flicker on the horizon, I realized something that my father's loyalty and my mother's image could never teach me. Safety isn't a house with blue shutters. Safety is the distance between you and the people who refuse to see your pain. I wasn't running away. I was running toward the only person left who believed me. Myself. The city didn't welcome me with open arms. It welcomed me with a roar of indifference. To the millions of people pulsing through the gray veins of the downtown district, I wasn't the problem daughter of a respectable family. I wasn't a liar or a sensitive girl with a vivid imagination. I was just a girl in a faded denim jacket, carrying a suitcase that smelled of a life she was trying to outrun. And that indifference was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. My first home was a room in a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage and old cigarettes. The radiator clanked like a dying machine, and the window looked out onto an alleyway where the sun only reached the pavement for 20 minutes a day. It was a far cry from the blue shutters and the manicured lawn of Maple Crescent. There was no lavender bleach here. There was no polished mahogany. But there was also no Ethan. I worked 3 jobs. I scrubbed floors in a diner at 4 a.m., filed papers for a grumpy accountant at noon, and stocked shelves at a 24-hour pharmacy until midnight. My hands, once soft and pampered by my mother's image, became calloused and cracked. My back ached, and my eyes were perpetually rimmed with the red fatigue of survival. "You look like you've seen a ghost, kid," the diner cook, a man named Sal who had more tattoos than words, said to me one morning as I mopped the grease from the linoleum. "I left the ghost behind, Sal," I said, not looking up. "I'm just tired of the haunting." It was during those long, lonely hours of labor that I began the real work, the architecture of a new self. I started seeing a therapist at a community clinic, a woman named Dr. Eris, who didn't care about my family's reputation or the Golden Boy's status in the church. "The trauma isn't just what happened that night, Alara," she said during our 4th session, her voice calm and steady. "The trauma is the silence that followed. Your family didn't just fail to protect you, they tried to erase your reality to save their own comfort. You're not just healing from an assault, you're healing from a disappearance." I spent months learning how to speak again, not the performative, polite speech of the Hayes household, but the raw, jagged truth of my own existence. I learned that no was a complete sentence. I learned that my body belonged to me, not to the unit. I learned that a family that requires your silence as the price of their love is not a family at all. It's a cult of personality. I stopped checking the mail. I changed my phone number. I let the Hayes part of me wither away like a dead leaf. I was building a life out of scrap metal and sheer will, brick by painful brick. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, it was loud, and it was often terrifyingly lonely. But when I locked the 3 deadbolts on my tiny apartment door at night, I knew one thing for certain. The only person in this room was me, and for the first time in 18 years, I was safe. 10 years is a long time to build a wall, and I had built mine out of reinforced concrete and total silence. I was no longer the quiet one from the end of the cul-de-sac. I was Ilara, an architect who specialized in restoring old, broken structures. Perhaps because I knew exactly what it felt like to have your foundations crumbled by the people supposed to maintain them. I lived in a city that didn't know my maiden name, in an apartment filled with plants I actually remembered to water, and with a partner who understood that fine was a banned word in our household. We spoke in truths, even when they were jagged. Then, on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, the wall I had spent a decade perfecting developed a hairline fracture. My phone buzzed on my desk, vibrating against a blueprint of a library annex. I didn't recognize the number, but the area code hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. It was the code for the suburb I had scrubbed from my maps. I let it ring. Then I let it go to voicemail. I stared at the blinking LED light for 10 minutes, my breath hitching in a way I hadn't felt since I was 18. When I finally gathered the courage to listen, the voice that crackled through the speaker wasn't the sharp, polished soprano of the mother I remembered. It was a thin, reedy ghost of a sound. "Ilara, it's your mother. Please, I know it's been a long time, but the house is falling apart, Ilara. Your father he's not well, and Ethan, oh God, Ilara, Ethan is in the news." The silence that followed her words was louder than the message itself. I sat in my ergonomic chair, surrounded by the life I had fought for, and felt the cold wind of Maple Crescent whistling through the vents. I didn't call back that night, or the next. I spent 48 hours in a fugue state, my mind racing back to the family jury and the way my father's ring had sounded against the mahogany. Clack, clack, clack. I thought about the golden boy and the way he had smiled at me over my sister's shoulder. I wondered what "in the news" meant. Had the mask finally slipped so far that even the Hayes family couldn't pin it back on? On Thursday, I typed Ethan Cole into a search engine. The results were a landslide of respectable destruction. There were headlines about community leader arrested, deacon facing multiple allegations, and pattern of misconduct spanning decades. There were photos of him being led out of a courthouse, his face shielded by a briefcase, but I would know those shoulders anywhere. I would know that posture, the posture of a man who thought he was untouchable because he had been protected by the architecture of the lie. But it wasn't just Ethan. There was a secondary headline, smaller but more devastating. Family of accused faces scrutiny for decades of silence. I looked at the photos of my childhood home attached to the articles. The blue shutters looked like closed eyes. The lawn was overgrown, the rose bushes choked with weeds. The fortress of respectability hadn't just cracked, it had imploded. The reputation they'd traded me for was now a toxic sludge, and they were drowning in it. The phone rang again. This time, I picked it up. "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 10 years learning how to stand on her own 2 feet. "Ilara? Oh, thank God," Lorraine sobbed. There was no image left in her voice. There was only the raw, ugly sound of a woman who realized she had backed the wrong horse. "It's a nightmare. The neighbors, they're throwing things at the house. The police were here. She's a wreck. She won't leave her room. Your father, he just sits there. He won't speak. He keeps saying we protected our own, but there's no one left, Ilara. Please, you have to come home. You have to tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Help us save the name." I looked at the blueprints on my desk, the designs for a building that was meant to hold knowledge, to hold truth, to hold people safely. "The name is already gone, Mother," I said, and the words felt like the final brick in my wall. "You traded it the night you told me I had a vivid imagination. You didn't protect your own, you protected a monster, and now you're surprised he's eating the house." "How can you be so cold?" she wailed. "We're your family." "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window, looking out at the city that actually raised me. "A family is a place where the truth lives. You live in a theater, and the play is finally over." I hung up. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I expected. I just felt a profound, quiet sadness for the girl who had waited 3 years for someone to hear her scream. I realized that the cracks in the fortress weren't my problem to fix. I was an architect of the future, not a restorer of ruins that were built on a foundation of betrayal. But as I looked at the dark screen of my phone, I knew one thing. I wasn't going back to Maple Crescent to save them. I was going back to bear witness to the demolition. Driving back into the suburb felt like descending into a deep-sea trench. The pressure increased with every mile, a familiar crushing weight settling onto my chest. I passed the park where Ethan used to mentor kids, the church where he once led the choir in songs of redemption, and finally, the turn onto the street that had once been the center of my universe. Maple Crescent had withered. The respectable neighbors had fled the scandal like rats from a sinking ship, leaving behind a row of houses that looked tired and defeated. But number 42 was the worst of them. The white paint was gray with road grime, and the flower beds, my mother's crowning glory, were choked with thorns and dead brown stalks. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at the front door. 10 years ago, I had walked out of that door with a suitcase and a secret. Now, I was walking back in with a career and a truth that no one could silence. I didn't knock. I still had the key, tucked away in the back of my desk for a decade, a cold piece of metal I never thought I'd touch again. The lock was stiff, resisting me, but with a sharp twist, it gave way. The smell hit me first. It wasn't lavender bleach anymore. It was the smell of stagnant air, unwashed dishes, and the sour, sharp scent of old age and fear. "Mother," I called out. My voice sounded alien in the foyer, too vibrant for a house that had decided to stop breathing. I found them in the living room. It was a tableau of total collapse. My father, Martin, was sitting in his leather wing-back chair, his hands resting on his knees. He had shrunk. The man who once loomed over the dinner table like a titan now looked like a discarded doll. His eyes were milky and unfocused, staring at a blank television screen. Lorraine was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by stacks of newspapers, the very articles I had read online. She was clipping them with a pair of silver embroidery scissors, her movements frantic and purposeless. "Ilara," she whispered, looking up. Her face was a map of broken capillaries and deep-seated grief. "You came. I knew you'd come. We have to organize the files. We have to show the lawyers that that he was framed. It's all a misunderstanding, isn't it?" She reached out to me, her hand shaking. I didn't take it. I walked to the window and pushed aside the heavy velvet curtains, letting a shaft of gray light cut through the dust motes. "It's not a misunderstanding, Mother," I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany. "It's a harvest. You spent 20 years planting lies, and now the crop is finally in." "Don't talk like that," she snapped, a flash of her old fire returning for a fleeting second. "We protected this family. We did everything for you." "You did everything for this," I said, gesturing to the decaying room. "You sacrificed me for a house that is now a crime scene. You sacrificed me for a man who is currently sitting in a jail cell because he did to dozens of other girls exactly what he did with me." "He was a deacon," my father muttered from his chair, his voice a dry rasp. "A man of character. We had to protect the name." I walked over to him, leaning down until I was eye level with the man who had traded his daughter for a respectable unit. "The name is a joke, Dad," I said quietly. "People don't say Hayes with respect anymore. They say it with a shudder. They use it as a warning about what happens when you value appearances over souls." I looked around the room, searching for Marissa. "Where is she?" "In her room," Lorraine whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "She won't come out. She says the world is staring at her. She says her life is over." "Her life isn't over," I said, feeling a sudden sharp pang of pity for the sister who had been the golden girl of a lie. "But her theater is. The play is finished. The audience has gone home." I stood in the center of the room, the architect in me seeing the structural failure of every relationship in the house. This wasn't a home, it was a ruin, and the only thing left to do with a ruin that is too far gone to save is to let it go. "I didn't come here to help you fix the name," I said, walking back toward the door. "I'm signing the papers tomorrow. You can stay here until the bank takes it, or you can leave, but I'm done being the ghost in your hallway." "You're leaving us," Lorraine cried out, her voice cracking. "In the middle of this? After everything we gave you?" "You didn't give me anything but a reason to leave," I said, my hand on the doorknob. As I stepped out onto the porch, the crooked blue shutter banged against the house. Thwack! It sounded like a gavel hitting a table. Case closed. I walked down the steps, the gray air of Maple Crescent feeling cleaner than the air inside. I didn't look back at the windows. I didn't look back at the girl who had been buried there. I got into my car and drove away, the architecture of a new life solid and unshakable beneath me. Behind me, the house on Maple Crescent continued to rot, a monument to the high price of perfection. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't a burden, it was a choice. And I chose to leave it behind.
The collapse of a house built on lies isn't a single explosion. It's a long, grinding decay. After I walked away from Maple Crescent for the last time, I didn't look back to see who stayed in the ruins. But the news and the legal documents I had to sign to dissolve my connection to the property told the story for me. The fallen idol, Ethan Cole. The golden boy didn't go down with dignity. Once the first brave woman came forward, the dam broke. A dozen others followed, spanning the 10 years I had been gone. The church stripped him of his title in a frantic attempt to save their own reputation, and the community leader was revealed as a serial predator who used his status as a hunting ground. He was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. In prison, there are no blue shutters to hide behind, and no family jury to acquit him. He is finally exactly what he always was, a man defined by his crimes, shivering in the cold light of the truth. The ruins, Lorraine and Martin. My parents couldn't survive the loss of their image. Without the respect of the neighbors, they didn't know how to exist. The house on Maple Crescent was foreclosed on a year later. Martin passed away shortly after, his heart finally giving out under the weight of a legacy that had turned to ash. Lorraine moved into a small assisted living facility in a different state, where no one knows the name Hayes. She still calls me sometimes, her voice thin and wandering, asking if I've seen the new curtains she bought. She is still decorating a house that no longer exists, trapped in a loop of perfection that has no audience left. The survivor, Marissa. Marissa took the hardest hit. She had built her entire identity on being the golden girl to Ethan's golden boy. When the mask fell, she suffered a total nervous breakdown. But in the wreckage, something strange happened. Without the pressure to be perfect, she finally started to get honest. She's in deep intensive therapy now, living in a quiet cottage 3 hours away from the city. We don't have a perfect relationship. We may never. But for the first time in our lives, we sent each other a Christmas card that didn't have a fake family photo on it. Just a note that said, "I'm trying." As for me, the quiet one finally found her roar. The community center I designed was completed last spring. I named it The Clearing. It's a place for at-risk youth, designed with floor-to-ceiling glass and open spaces. There are no dark hallways. There are no locked hutches. It is a building designed to be seen through, a place where the truth is the primary building material. But the real good news wasn't the career success or the awards. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning in my own home, a home that looks nothing like the one on Maple Crescent. I was sitting on the floor with my 3-year-old daughter, Maya. She had accidentally knocked over a glass of juice, and it had stained the rug, a deep, stubborn purple. She looked at me, her lower lip trembling, her eyes wide with the familiar fear of a child who thinks she's broken the perfection of the world. "I'm sorry, Mommy," she whispered. "I made a mess." I looked at the stain. Then I looked at my daughter. I didn't think about the rug. I didn't think about the image of our living room. I pulled her into my lap and kissed the top of her head, smelling the sweet, messy scent of a life lived out loud. "It's just juice, Maya," I said, and the words felt like a benediction. "We don't hide messes in this house. We just clean them up together." She giggled and hugged me back, and in that moment the last of the haze ghosts vanished. I realized that I hadn't just survived the demolition of my past, I had used the bricks to build something that could never be broken. The architecture of my life was finally complete. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was real.
Thank you for staying with us through Ilara's journey. Stories like this aren't easy to hear, but they are necessary to tell. For every perfect house with blue shutters, there is often a voice fighting to be heard over the suffocating sound of a family's silence. If this story resonated with you, or if it reminded you that you aren't alone in your own architecture of survival, please consider supporting this channel so we can continue bringing these truths to light. You can help us reach others who might be sitting in the dark by hitting the like button right now. Your engagement tells the algorithm that these stories matter and that survivors deserve to be seen. If you know someone who is currently struggling to find their voice, or someone who needs to know that there is a beautiful, messy life waiting for them after the demolition of a lie, please share this video with them. And finally, make sure to subscribe to Echoes of Trust and Betrayal and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. We believe that every time a survivor speaks, a wall comes down. Don't let the respectability of the world keep you in the shadows. Your voice is the only thing that can truly set you free. Until next time, keep building your own light. We'll see you in the next story.